So welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. Today we're honored to have Kristen Denny, and she's going to be, this is the first part of a three-part series on the 2020 election. And this part is going to be focused on voting and misinformation, and it's called Role of Media, 2020 Elections, Voting Issues During COVID. So now I'll hand it off to Bill to do the intro.
Thank you, Jeremy, and just thank you again to Jeremy. Has really been the glue that has held this series together for a long time, since the height of the pandemic, and hopefully we're going to carry through long past the end of the pandemic, maybe to the time when the pandemic is forgotten. But we've had some wonderful, wonderful speakers and sessions, and if you go to our website, you can catch up. You can watch the recordings and read the papers, and they're really great. And today is going to be even greater, and then we're going to have Kristen back a couple times. So couldn't be more timely. Kristen's bio is on the SEPA website. It's also on our Food for Thought website. But just to reprise a few things, she's, believe it or not, even though she looks 18, she's got 20 years of professional experience. In all three sectors. She's got a really heavy-duty experience in politics. She's worked in Florida and Washington State, in DC, federal, state, and local elections. She is a communications expert. She's done that not only for the public sector, but in the kind of polling media area, public relations. She's worked for major corporations like FedEx. And she's been a consultant in major campaigns, including John Edwards' presidential campaign, Bernie Sanders' campaign, was one of the key people in electing the current mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser. And my own editorial is, we've got some really great mayors, young mayors around the country, and attorney generals, and so we got a strong bench. So once we get through with this crazy election, hopefully the right way, there's a whole generation of great new people for the political sector. So I'm very hopeful about that. Kristen has been teaching for us for a number of years in political and politics and political communication. And she's also taught some short courses on crisis communication as well. So she's really great. She's a great teacher. She's a great consultant, and she's a great person and a wonderful mother.
Thank you.
And she's a good friend.
Yes.
So much to do. Kristen, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks everyone for being here. Appreciate it. So just dive right in. I'm gonna ask Jeremy to help me kind of manage things. I do want to talk to you about what you want to talk about. So we've got a lot to cover. As you know, this is a very unique election cycle. It's been a unique 4 years. Let's just call it what it is. And it just keeps getting more interesting by the day, almost by the minute. But I'd like to hear your questions. Is the chat okay for that, Jeremy? Just for, yeah. So go ahead as you have them, and then we'll address them, because I definitely want to talk about what you want to know, okay? But as I said, this election cycle is unprecedented in so many ways. Obviously, the partisanship that we're experiencing now is unprecedented. It's kind of off the charts on both sides. Then we have the COVID, the pandemic layered onto that, which is what we're going to focus on today, because it impacts our voting, the actual voting, which is a very cornerstone of our democracy. And we've come to, like many things, we're starting to learn that a lot of these, our mechanisms were just mores or customs, not laws. They are not written laws, most of these things. And so you'll hear that kind of talked about on the news. Well, why isn't that against the law? Isn't this against the law? No, actually it's not. It's the way we've kind of run government up until this point. Now, I will say, I'm going to make a prediction here. You will see from as we move into the future that laws will be written to kind of address some of the concerns that have arisen. But let's back up a little bit. And this is in the paper. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of the paper that I submitted. So, obviously the framers wanted us to participate as individuals in our democracy. That we all know. This the Constitution is still kind of the gold standard of democracies in the world. And we have done a pretty good job of following it to the letter. With separation of powers, we've all learned that, right? Judiciary, executive, and then legislative. And at the cornerstone of all that is obviously how we vote and how we vote in our leaders. And so this year, because of COVID, we have found ourselves kind of in a dilemma. How do people vote safely? And so around the country, you have seen states try to address this individually. Why is it that states still mandate their own voting laws and regulations? Well, it goes back to state sovereignty because they, remember, underwrite their own elections. In other words, they pay for it. They are responsible for paying for their elections. So they want to keep control over that. And again, when you back up a little bit, when we're voting, you hear a lot about voting around presidential cycles. But in all the off years, in the years between the 4 different cycles or 4-year cycles of presidential elections, people are voting for governors and state legislatures and things like that. So it does make a little sense that the states control this, but it does cause confusion because every state has a different voter registration law. They have a different, deadlines and eligibility and that kind of thing. So it does cause a little bit of confusion. Now, has there been efforts in the past to federalize the voting system? Yes, absolutely. There's been big money put towards this. It has never really gone anywhere. There needs to be more motivation and to make it happen. Now you hear about gerrymandering and things like that, which I'll put aside for now. But gerrymandering has been used as a good example of why to federalize these election cycles. So, and it continues to be. But, we may see after this another push to federalize how states vote. In other words, everybody votes by the same amount of rules or the same rules. So now you hear a lot of chatter about absentee versus mail-in voting and the differences thereof. There's no difference between absentee voting and mail-in voting or vote by mail, as they say. There are 5 states that currently do it. Vote by mail, all vote by mail. They've been doing it for decades. And the reason why they went towards that method in the first place was primarily for cost reasons, but also because it mitigates fraud. Because there's no credible evidence to suggest that there is widespread systemic fraud within absentee or vote by mail. So the only difference between vote by mail and absentee is that you have to request as a registered voter an absentee ballot in your state. And then it's by each state when those requests are made and how they're honored and that kind of thing. That's a state by state thing. So this is the way we've all, a lot of people have done this. Now, what you've seen because of COVID restrictions, that a lot of states have either relaxed or eliminated their access to absentee voting. So what that means is that, like in my state, my home state of Virginia, where I'm registered to vote, you had to produce, if you requested an absentee ballot, you had to prove or submit a reason as to why you needed the absentee ballot. You're out of town for work, or you're sick, or you can't, there had to have been some reason. They eliminated that. So all you had to do now, they did that like on July 1st. This is very new. you just request your ballot, you get a ballot in the mail. So why is it this year it's different? Well, there's one reason: Donald Trump. Why does Donald Trump fear mail-in ballots so much? Because in the 2016, he lost the absentee vote. I'm going to call it the absentee vote, but make sure you know that includes mail-in or vote by mail. He lost the absentee vote by a large margin. So in his mind, he's decided that those voters aren't his voters. Okay. And so he set out on this effort to kind of, what's the word? Criticize or diminish trust in those policies and processes. There's no credible evidence to suggest otherwise. Okay, this is just his thinking. Now, you guys have all heard it said he himself has voted by mail, absentee many times. Many people in his family have done this as well. So he obviously trusts the processes. He believes that the people that vote early or vote by mail or absentee are not his voters. So he's trying to suppress it. Do you guys remember, this was a little bit of a tactic back in 2012 when he was trying to make the distinction between birth certificate and live certificate of birth, when he was trying to say that Barack Obama was the whole birther argument. You've heard that he's trying to do the same thing. There's no difference between a birth certificate and a live certificate of birth. If you pulled out your birth certificate right now, it's kind of 50-50 what's going to be on it. And in fact, most of the red states are live certificate of birth. Barack Obama had a live certificate of birth, and Trump was trying to say that wasn't valid. Only a birth certificate was valid. Make sense? So he's trying the same tactic here. Now, why is it working? Well, again, Trump has dedicated a whole lot of his time to, and rhetoric and our propaganda, however you want to describe it, to trying to cast out on our major institutions that we as Americans have always trusted and have always respected, like the press. That's the main one. That's a good example, but it's kind of throughout. You can see it even on the local level. This distrust or skepticism now of police departments, or any kind of, and again, Trump has been pretty skilled in bringing or shedding this his bright light of skepticism or doubt on things that have never, ever experienced the scrutiny, like the Department of Justice, like the FBI, like the CIA. And it's been completely for political purposes. Now, I'm not suggesting that other politicians haven't tried this. It's just not been so egregious, not so in your face. And frankly, the public's not used to that. They tend to want to believe our leaders. Politics aside, there is an inherent trust in how we trust our leaders. So it's not insignificant that it's coming from the top. And so there is this level of just general doubt. Why? So I'm going to get into a little bit of kind of how the crescendo that we've experienced here in terms of this building of distrust kind of, and like I said, I'm going to scratch the surface here because there's a lot of meat in these subjects. So what we found is the rise of cable news and then social media, which by the way is designed for you to go find your community and be with like-minded people. But as we know in politics, if you only seek out the views of those who agree with you over and over and over, then you start to believe that that's the prevailing viewpoint. And then once you have established this very definite point of view that, oh, by the way, everybody agrees with, any kind of different or perspective becomes dangerous. And this is human nature. And in politics and in voting, we do a lot, you know.
Kristen?
So
Kristen?
that, yes.
I'm not sure if this is happening for everyone else, but it's kind of like fuzzy or breaking in and out. Is that?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to let you know. I wasn't sure if anyone else was having the same thing, but sorry.
Okay. And so this is generally what we call this is tribalism, and it's and again, this is a big subject, but it's basically like you kind of you ensconce yourself, lack of a better word, with like-minded people, and you refuse to look beyond that. And we are seeing a kind of a explosion of this kind of behavior. And again, it becomes this, not only it becomes your opinion or your perspective or your viewpoint is not just different, it's bad or it's wrong. This is the direction where we are headed. And there's a good book, I wanted to mention it because I love it. It's about tribalism. It's kind of about misinformation. It's by Jonah Goldberg. It's called Suicide of the West. It's a good book if you want to check it out. Jonah is a conservative, but he writes very eloquently about this. I use it in my classes. And it talks about tribalism. And we're all, as human beings, we all are susceptible to this kind of behavior. This is the first time we've seen a national leader kind of sow this division. So when you layer on all of the things in place that kind of make it kind of a nice breeding ground, like social media, and then you have somebody from the top, your leader, who is sowing the division, it's just kind of gotten out of control. Let me stop in here and take a couple of questions. Jeremy, you think that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a few in the chat.
Yeah, let me just look back. Okay. Okay, so let me just read the question. What do you think of the recent political theory that there is no such thing as an undecided voter, just voters who do not vote, and that the campaign just needs to motivate its supporter to go to the polls? Okay. That's a very interesting question. It's kind of multi-layered, but I'm just gonna go with this. Yes, that's true. That's true right now. Do you know that 90% of the people, that 90% of registered voters or likely voters, let's say that, likely voters, that means they have a voting history of voting in presidential elections between, I think it's like an 8-year period, okay? So likely voters have, 90% have already made up their mind. So on the margins, you have undecided voters who aren't politically engaged at all. More and more, you find that registered voters are politically engaged, okay? Now, let's keep in mind, only 40% of millennials are actually registered to vote. Now, we could go into a whole conversation about why don't they register to vote? Let's start a program to get registered people to vote, or the voter registration laws are X, Y, and Z, and they should be changed. All of those are very worthwhile conversations. And we could sit here and talk a whole lot. I could talk a whole lot about why millennials are only 40% are actually voting. And by the way, the 40% that vote are very good voters. But when you think about that group, if they were voting at like 80%, they could actually run the country. That's the thing about senior citizens. They're voting, they're about 74% registered voters. They make a lot of decisions through the ballot box. Now, when we say, how do you turn out voters, or if turning out voters is critical, especially in different states. Let's take Pennsylvania, for example. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. You guys know you've heard that. You've heard that term about battleground states. There are about 10 states, give or take, in any election that kind of make or break the election in terms of meeting that number to win the Electoral College. By the way, we could have a big conversation about Electoral College versus popular vote. That's also a very worthwhile conversation to have. And I think we're going to hear that more and more, that we should follow the popular vote. But I'll put that aside for now. So the most Pennsylvanians are registered Democrat. That doesn't mean a thing, all right? Really, that state is up for grabs. It's swing state. By the way, it's within the margin of error right now between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So what happened in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost the election by 44,000 votes, and African Americans in Philadelphia did not show up, and that is how she lost the election. Okay, if she won Pennsylvania, she would have won. So yes, there is a lot of emphasis on turning out your voters. So which states will determine the outcome of the presidential election? Okay, I was just thinking about this because I go back and forth. Michigan's gone. I don't know if you guys realize that. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won in 2016. These were Obama states that went to Trump. Hillary lost all three. Michigan is now firmly in the Biden corner. In fact, Donald Trump has pulled out of Michigan. And in terms of his advertising, he's not visiting there. You'll see that he's got Wisconsin. He's still going to Wisconsin, of course, Pennsylvania. And now he's kind of playing with Minnesota. I'm not convinced Minnesota is going to go red. I just don't see it yet. Florida is always in the equation because it carries so many electoral votes. And it's swing. It's totally swing. And so what's the demographic down there? Well, older voters. And then we have, the Hispanic population in Florida is different than what you would consider a Latino voter. In fact, that's why we call them differently. We call them Hispanics in Florida. And the reason why is because they behave very differently. They're from the islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and they just behave very differently. Now, they are very religious and they tend to be more conservative. I don't know if you've noticed, Trump is very much working the Venezuelan angle down in Florida. That also means a lot to them. So when you factor all those things in, Florida will continue to be very difficult for the Democrats to win. Not to say they won't or can't. Absolutely, it's still a swing state, but it's going to be hard. And both camps will work it really hard, and there'll be a lot of money spent. Will the election be contested in the courts? I'm going to say yes, only because it's Donald Trump. And it's not going to be like hanging Chad type situation. It's going, you guys know what I'm talking about when I say hanging Chads. There's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, about the validity and integrity of these mail-in ballots. You can see there's been a lot of effort trying to mitigate that and address people's fears over that. but I think that there will be some of that. There will be some court challenges. I don't know how they play out right now, but I got to say there will be. Yes, only, like I said, 5 states all vote by mail, and they've been doing this for years. Like Washington, Hawaii, Utah, Colorado, Oregon. Yeah. Yes. This is a question. Would you also say that the lack of local news sources like newspapers and consolidation of media through media conglomerates also play a role? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I have a sister. She lives in Florida. I'm from Florida. And she's a school teacher. And she's, you know, she's not that politically engaged. She's just lives her life. She's certainly not like me. She has, you know, 3 children, a grandchild, and, you know, she lives her, you know, she's got other things to do than, you know, focus on the news. And she'll see something on Facebook and she'll say, what do you think of this? And it's some sort of, it's information that's incorrect. And there's so many examples like on Facebook. I mean, it's hard to keep track. And I'll say to her, well, if that was true, like, let me give you an example. Back when Obama was president, she sent me a link of something she saw on Facebook, and it said that Obama had, through executive order, had made saying the Pledge of Allegiance in schools illegal. Okay. And she goes, well, how did this happen? What? I can't believe he let this happen. And I said, wait a second, Kim. I said, this is my sister. I said, if something like that had actually happened, don't you think it would be at the top of your local news program? And she was like, yeah. I was like, okay, that's kind of the gauge that I use for her, because she's not going to go to the New York Times. She's not, you know, she's not going to put on, you know, NBC News or CBS News. I mean, she's just not, that's not where she is. But she does watch her local news, and she does read her local newspaper. So, and yes, because we've seen a drop off of you know, funding and resources put towards these local outlets, absolutely, has made a difference.
Kristen, by the way, my daughter that same day sent me an email saying, did you see that Obama did this? Is that right? And I said, no, no, it can't be. She said, look at the link. It's from CNN. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the link, it did have CNN in it, but not CNN.com. It was a fake address. Yeah. And she works at the New York City Police Department, so who was largely not pro-Obama. So somebody had made this up and sent it to everybody in the police department. Right. So it's a great example of something that, and I said to her, how would I not know that? Right. But a lot of people don't have somebody like that, like you, like me, that they would go to and say, I wonder if that's, you know, she wondered if it were true, but her initial reaction, particularly when she saw CNN, was that it was true. So there's a guy, I can't think of his name right now, but he's made a living off of, you know, creating these fake news websites. And they're pretty impressive when you go to them, CNN, ABC, and they're just small, very nuanced differences in the websites, but they seem legit. And he's made, and I mean, I think the New York Times has interviewed him. I mean, he's like, yeah, it's kind of like I try to see how stupid people are. I mean, he's you know, he's just a guy that in his basement, you know, does this. And my point is that this guy's been profiled. He admits it. Everything on his website's made up. And you know, I try to use this tell my sister, see, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. But it's more to that than, and let's take a step back. So, to why people are susceptible to this. And it's, you know, I know a lot of folks have heard about QAnon, which is a right-wing conspiracy
it's not, the conspiracy itself is not brand new, but the right wing has, and I'm talking about the fringe of the right wing, has taken it to another level. And it's kind of it's not that many Republicans. So even if you like were to slice and dice the Republican Party, only like 2% of the Republican Party believe this and the QAnon stuff. And yet it feels like it's amplified everywhere because it's controversial and because they're very vocal on social media. And, you know, and then you have Trump who, you know, elevates it, right? And again, it's not that Trump thinks or Trump believes any of this QAnon stuff. He's just trying to sow division. He's trying to cast doubt. He's trying to make it all seem illegitimate. So, and again, this is a tactic that for somebody like him who is in a job that he doesn't belong and he doesn't want to be exposed as a fraud. So he tries to create distractions all the time, right? This is nothing new. People do this all the time. You probably know somebody in your life that does this. But it's the problem with him doing it at this level is it's eroding our democracy right before our eyes. And so that's the underlying problem. Oh, okay. So I would love to hear more about, yeah, Jeremy, you said about, you're a Cuban American. Talk to us about that a minute. I mean, I think it's important.
So I was born and raised in Miami. Both my parents are Cuban. They came over in the 80s. And I was raised very, very conservative. And it was all just around the issue of Cuba and Cuban policy, which is really interesting because it wasn't until I left Florida that I realized that the Latino community is so diverse. And, you know, the racial aspect of it, the fact that I'm white passing versus others who are not so white passing and the privilege I have, but also how being Cuban American is kind of seen as a model minority in at least in Florida. And so there's this kind of disconnect between, we don't see ourselves as Latino. I mean, I was raised to believe that other Latinos are not the same. They came over the border, even though my parents came on rafts. There's that distinction. And then I think I'm surprised here, well, I'm not surprised, but a lot of people will be surprised when they come down to Miami, all the Trump pen signs in these small little houses. And it's like just Cubans that came over in the 60s, 70s, 80s, who have just turned their backs on other immigrants. And it's like, there's no solidarity with other immigrants. And that's why I think Patrick mentioned in the chat, the Latino vote block, it's good to understand, like, differentiate between groups, but it's so diverse that sometimes it becomes a stumbling block for politicians who want to engage in Florida.
Right. And identity. Okay, so and this kind of feeds to what you're saying, Jeremy. So you've heard the term identity politics. Now the Democrats do this a lot. They kind of they take a minority group and they kind of treat them all the same. And it's problematic. It has been problematic with Latinos. And they try to craft policy around this as well. And it doesn't work. And so again, you'll hear that kind of in the space of, as we look at our politics and how they're evolving, that identity politics doesn't really work. Now, we still see it. Why do you think Biden chose a Black woman, an African-American woman, to be his running mate? These things still exist. And so again, but they're multi-layered, and you can't, it's not a one and done. You have to kind of dig a little deeper. Thank you for that, Jeremy. I mean, we can go on and on about Hispanics in Florida. They're different. So Ohio's red. Somebody asked me about Ohio. Ohio used to be the swing state. Do you remember that? It's kind of red now. Now, it'll be close because of COVID. it will probably be closer than it has been in a couple cycles because of COVID. Because in Ohio, because of Mike DeWine, their Republican mayor, governor, he has approached COVID very differently than other Republican governors, and it's paid off. So you do have, there is a little bit of a divide in the electorate on COVID. We just don't know exactly who's voting only on COVID. So, but I still say Ohio's red. You may disagree with me. So I mentioned the 40% millennial voter registration. Okay, that's millennials. I've done a lot of work on millennials. That's why I mention them. Is it across the board? No. Like I said, older Americans, baby boomers, are very good at participating in that cycle. I love to tell this story. I do a lot of politics in Virginia, where I live, and there's this very big retirement community right about 15 miles south of DC in Springfield, Virginia. It's this retirement community. It's pretty big. It's its own precinct. And politicians visit that place. If they're running for statewide office or whatever, they go to, it's called Green Spring. They go to Green Spring like 4 or 5 times to talk to these voters, shake hands with them. And, you know, and people always ask me, like, why? Because they have a 94% participation rate. So you know they're voting. So you want to make sure you get out there and vote. I mean, you try to get their vote because you know they're voting. So it's as simple as that. Like I said about millennials, I don't have the data on Gen Z. Gen X is really small. Gen X is pretty small. So we kind of focus on baby boomers and millennials. Millennials are a big voting bloc. They just don't use their power because they're not registered. And like I said, I do a lot of research on this as to why. And a lot of it has to do with trust in institutions, but that's another conversation.
Hey, Kristen, if they were voting, is there any way to ascertain how they would split Trump, Biden? Would they be overwhelmingly Biden or not?
Yeah. I mean, they would be, because so what we know about millennial voters is, or millennials, not voters, millennials, is that they're very forward thinking. So when I did a lot of my research, it was back kind of looking at the 2016 cycle. And one of the things I didn't like about Hillary was that she was always talking about her resume and things she'd done in the past. And that didn't appeal to them. They want somebody who's very forward thinking. They absolutely consider themselves a global citizen, not just a citizen of the United States or, you know, Florida or New York or whatever. They are very much global citizens. And, you know, they want to see themselves as part of the solution. So that's why Bernie did so well with them. Okay. Bernie crafted a message that was like, I need your help. This is, you got to help me change this. I can't do it without you. If you remember that rhetoric, it was about, you know, you're part of the solution. And that's how they think. So I do think they'd be overwhelming. Biden. Jen, I just saw some data about Gen Zers, which is the generation behind millennials, and they're overwhelming Biden. But that makes sense. That doesn't surprise anybody. The group I don't know that much about, or I should know more, is Gen X, which is my generation, kind of sandwiched in between. And I would say it's more 50-50. I don't know, Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. By the way, on Gen Z, people like David Brooks say they would be overwhelmingly Biden because they're very ethical and moral. And it's funny because you talk about evangelicals being religious and quote unquote ethical, but they're for Trump. It's a very confusing, you know, I find it confusing. I'm very religious myself in an unconventional way. I'm not part of congregations. I believe in God. I believe in all those things, but on my own. So I I find it astounding that people who consider themselves religious would vote for Trump. What
Mhm.
is there
Mhm.
any research that indicates why? I mean, is it just abortion? Is it just a one issue thing?
Yeah, no. So, okay, there's been a lot written on this because it is hard to peg, okay? And I think the best explanation, which it doesn't really, for me, it's not a good enough explanation. It doesn't really answer my question. It doesn't, satisfyingly answer my question, which is, why do these evangelicals, and again, I'm using a bigger term.
That includes Catholics and Jews.
That's right. Because, okay, and so for polling purposes, when you see a poll that says evangelicals for Trump or blah, 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 whatever. So as the pollsters put Catholics and evangelicals, which the way I describe evangelicals is that these are people that are actively trying to convert people to Christianity, okay? Or to their flavor of Christianity. They're actually out there doing that. So, and I don't know if all Catholics are doing that. But because they care and vote on an issue that is kind of pegged to be religious, like choice, they're kind of lumped in with evangelicals. And the only, and again, you'll see that used, well, it's about choice, it's about Supreme Court, that kind of thing. They use that kind of as a talking point, or a justification. But from what I can tell, they feel like they're the only, okay, let me back up a minute. Religion in this country is dying. Actually, religion worldwide is dying. Now, does that mean that it's going to go away tomorrow? No. But it's only because, and this is a natural evolution, because people have access to so much information, and they have access to different cultures and different ways, in the different ways people live, and they're open to it. Okay, so traditional religion, as we kind of know it here in this country, is waning. Okay, so I think that the evangelicals feel like that Trump is the only candidate that's talking to them, and he does make a lot of promises. I don't know if you remember, but in 2016, Trump was like, this, you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. And I'm gonna, nobody can say Merry Christmas anymore, and I'm done with that. And well, that's not exactly true. But for the first time, these evangelicals felt like, you know what? This is somebody who cares about, even though it seems petty. And by the way, the Democrats have been telling these folks for a long time, that's petty. That's silly. Why are you mad about that? So all of a sudden they have somebody come up and say, that's not right. And that shouldn't be the way it is. So then the other part of this is, have you heard the saying, it's easier to con somebody than convince them they've been conned? This is very much applies to voters. They're not ready to, there's a lot of people that voted for Trump and put a lot of faith and trust in him. And they're not ready to admit they made the wrong decision. It kind of comes down to that. And you probably have people that are, that are kind of fall into this category. They're not ready to admit that they may have made the wrong decision. And obviously that's their prerogative. So there's a question about Election Day. So Election Day. Usually I get so excited about Election Day. I'm kind of dreading it, only because it's going to be fever pitch by both sides, and then by the media, and because there's going to be all kinds of accusations of fraud. Now, you've probably noticed that different outlets, I noticed when I was watching football on Sunday that the NFL had a commercial or an ad that said, we may not know the winner of the election on election day. And so there's kind of been this effort to try to prepare people that there will not be an answer, because they have to count these absentee ballots. And in some of these states, they're just not set up for it, like other states would be. So they have to allow themselves more time. As I mentioned in my paper, Florida and Arizona have a large amount of part-time residents. And so it always takes them about a week. Like in 2018, they took them about a week to declare the winner of their Senate race. And they're used to that, but there will be this effort to kind of use that to undermine the election results. The media, I don't know how the media is going to react on election day, but they should be responsible and try to explain it to people about the mechanisms about what's happening. It does take longer to count these absentee votes. And this is nothing new. Like I said, it's happened before in certain states that deal with absentee voters quite a bit.
Hey, Kristen, though, it will only matter in the swing states, right? Because the other ones, like California and New York, I mean, they can declare who won already.
Yes.
I mean, so there's so many states that are just red or blue. They never change. They'll never change. There's no chance. It's just, so we're probably talking about the dispute probably couldn't reach more than 10, maybe
right.
less than that, right?
Right. So there will be some, okay, this is the other thing that could be, that we're going to be dealing with this cycle. There are states that are going to be in play for the Democrats that have never been in play for the Democrats, like Georgia, okay? Now, if you look at it kind of just in a very practical way, the Atlanta metro area has been expanding. And so anytime you have a state like Virginia, okay, Virginia is a good one, a good example. You have a state where it has a very vibrant urban center. Here it's the, Northern Virginia, the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Then you start to see, a kind of it, a tendency to move to the left. So when you look at it on its face, the other thing about Georgia is they've had many, many immigrants move into that state, okay, because that's where the jobs were. So, so it makes sense that they'd be transitioning, but this would be the first time that you would have a state like Georgia be in play in a presidential election. And so then, when something out of the ordinary happens or it doesn't seem quite right, and to Bill's point, it'd be like if on election night, they're like, hey, New York's, too close to call. And everybody'd be like, what? No way, right? I mean, right? And so that'd be the same thing with Georgia. And I could see that happening with Georgia. And so
Arizona, maybe?
Yeah, Arizona, let's see. Okay, so here are the ones that are kind of in play, the red states. Arizona, which Arizona has already been kind of crouching left. Nevada as well. I put Nevada in that category. And the interesting wild card about Nevada, so it's heavy union because of Las Vegas. And the union has a lot of sway out there, and they really mobilize their voters in ways that no other state can in terms of union workers. But COVID creates a problem because a lot of these folks have been out of work. So it's gonna be interesting. Usually the unions line up and are there to help the Democrat, whoever that is. It's not that way this time. So it's going to be interesting to see. But Georgia, with its growing urban center, is going to be in play. Then we have North Carolina, which Obama won in 2008. And let me think. Is that it? North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona. and Georgia. Now, there was a time when they thought Texas would be in play. It's not, but you'll hear a little bit about it. It'll probably be a closer vote than it's ever been, but it's gonna go. It's still red. Am I missing one, Bill? I can't.
Well, the only one maybe, but it's probably not the presidential. But it looks like Lindsey Graham could lose, right?
Yeah.
That senatorial campaign is equal.
Right. So that's an interesting thing, because there's plenty of Trump Republicans there, and that could absolutely, carry Lindsey over the finish line. But there's also quite a few what I call conventional Republicans. They're mad at him over John McCain. In fact, it's such an issue that the Democrats running ads on it about how he kind of turned his back on John McCain. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So there's that. And then there's quite a few African-American voters in South Carolina as well. And Lindsey's opponent's an African-American. Yeah. So there's nothing better than an African-American on the ballot than turning out African-Americans, which is another reason why you see Kamala Harris on the ticket. Now, Alabama, do you guys remember that special in Alabama where the Democrat won, which was the first time in decades? He's probably going to lose. But there are still ways, and again, it's in some of these southern states, the African-American vote is very, very, very important. Very important for Democrats. And you have to make sure they show up. So, do I think that Cindy McCain's endorsement? So Cindy McCain made an official endorsement of Joe Biden. Do I think it's going to matter in Arizona? No, I don't. I don't think endorsements matter. Am I wrong? I think it may make some people who decided to vote for Biden feel better about their vote, but I don't think it's going to make a big difference. I don't think endorsements matter much at all. That's just me. But
Does Kelly matter? Having Kelly running for the Senate, is he going to draw votes because an astronaut and all that kind of stuff, and his wife, would that draw some moderate Republicans? And
So, absolutely. And I think, so anybody who, think about Mark Kelly, which I know him. He's married to Gabby Giffords, right, the congresswoman who was shot in Tucson. It's probably almost a decade ago. She survived, and now she has been an advocate on gun control. She and her husband, Mark. Mark's obviously an astronaut. Anybody who is seen as kind of outside the political establishment always does well. Now, the minute they're elected, they become part of the establishment, and then that all goes away. Trump is having a problem with this now. He kind of ran as the outsider, the disruptor, and now he's kind of, and that's kind of the way voters think. Once you're in, you're one of them. And so, but yes, Mark Kelly will win probably by double digits.
Really? Mm-hmm. Is that enough to turn Arizona?
No, unfortunately we can't take that and extrapolate and say, okay, now Biden's going to win Arizona. We can't do that. There's so many states where Trump is outperforming the Senate candidate. And like let's see, he's outperforming Lindsey Graham. One state he's not is in Iowa. Joni Ernst, who's also a veteran, and the Democrats don't have a really, really strong candidate there. They should win Iowa. Now, Iowa is one of those places where if there's a big presidential primary, you in that state that happens earlier in the year, you normally see them kind of gravitate towards the left or gravitate towards the right, because they have heard these presidential candidates have been running around the state talking about Republican issues or Democratic issues, so they kind of get You're used to hearing that. Iowa right now is really on the edge for Biden and Trump, and Joni Ernst is in the fight for her life. One more, what, you tell me, Jeremy, when we're ready to go. Do I support the Electoral College? Well, yes. Like I said, this is a big discussion. Excuse me. And it means there's a lot to discuss here, but the reason why I still believe in the Electoral College is because if it was all about popular vote, then you would see candidates only campaign in a handful of states. And I still think it's important for them to see, excuse me, or hear from everybody.
It might be bad. It might be bad for the country too, right? Because you have big states with lots of people like California and New York that are not really representative of America.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you know, that might actually foment more conflict in the country, even
Right.
beyond just left or right. It'd just be New Yorkers and their, you know, their attitudes and their lattes, and, you know, becomes beyond politics to culture and income and
Right.
values and everything else.
It actually sows division. And now, do I think in the spirit of democracy that majority, you know, that it's important to acknowledge what the majority thinks and, you know, respect that? Absolutely. There's got to be a solution there. It's one of those things that when I talk to students and in my class and others, and I'll say, this is a problem. And if you have a solution, we're all ears. But do you understand what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Why I think that there's this issue with just doing away the Electoral College. Like I said, we could have a big conversation about this and it would be worth our time, but just simply put, I still believe in the Electoral College.
Practically, there's not much you can do about it anyway, because the Senate is going to reflect, you know, the balance again, one person, one vote. And so the Senate is never going to vote for something that's going to endanger their own jobs, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one thing that I do think we're going to see is kind of this expansion. I do feel like that we will, maybe not in the next 4 years, let's see what happens in November, but you're going to see this push to make DC a state or Puerto Rico a state, which will mean two other votes, 4 other votes if it's Puerto Rico and DC in the Senate. And so the other thing, there's been a lot of chatter in DC around expanding the Supreme Court. There's no rules in our Constitution or any mandates in our Constitution that says that the Supreme Court should be 9. So, you know, again, we're going to see, and I think, and there's probably somewhere in that where you can address this issue about popular vote versus Electoral College. So it's not nice and tidy. And it's hard for me to say that the popular vote shouldn't matter. That's really hard for me to say. But then when I look at the flip side, and to Bill's point, which was eloquently put, it just sows division if we do that, because you only have a president who feels like they only campaign in certain states, they'll cater to the big metro areas, and so I don't know. I don't think it's the answer.
Do you want to make a final statement? And since we do get you 2 more times, we probably should wrap it up.
And I encourage you guys to reach out to me, offline or, my email. It's got to be somewhere, because I'm on staff at Columbia. So please reach out with questions. I really want to hear what you think. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the bubble and I don't, I feel like I'm the one that's out of touch, right? So I want to hear what you think, especially on things I've said today. So I do want to wrap it up by saying this, the rise of misinformation, and I said it in my paper, the reason why I don't call it disinformation is because I don't think it was done on purpose. I think just the evolution of how communication flows we find ourselves here. We're going to try to fix it. And we will probably do that. I mean, it might not be for a while, but we will. But the good news is I have teenagers in my house, and they're a lot smarter about social media than I am. And so there's that too. Just the way people take in information is going to change and evolve. And so we don't really know how that's going to look either. But this is a big problem, and it will eventually erode our democracy. And that should alarm all of us. And it's not necessarily a blue versus red thing. It's just about preserving our democracy. And I do worry about that. I do think there's time right now in this moment to reverse some of the devastation in that area. But if we don't change course come November, I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I mean, I don't mean to be alarmist, but it really is going to be interesting. And it's just, like I said, it's not just, and it trickles down in ways that you probably don't realize. And that's only going to become more and more noticeable. So anyway, like I said, we just scratched the surface, and I hope it was helpful, and I hope that you learned something. And, like I said, reach out to me with other questions or comments about something I said here today, because I'd really like to know.
We'll see you again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.